Who would win? All 6 original JoJos, or every current Tokyo Jujutsu High student? I put out a poll on my channel asking people about the outcome of this fight, mainly for fun, but after reading some of the comments and seeing the results, I decided to make a video on it. Unsurprisingly, the results were heavily in favor of the JoJos, but I don't think it's as one-sided and easy as people think. Spoilers for both series ahead. This is being recorded as of chapter 263 of JJK, so it covers everything until then. Here's the rules for this battle. 1. This includes every original JoJo, so that means Jonathan, Joseph, Jotaro, Josuke, Giorno, and Jolene. And for the poll, we used Tokyo's Jujutsu students, so that includes anyone, living or dead, who was a student in 2018. So, Yuji's class, Yuta's class, and Hikari's class. Each of which is really small. Rule 2. Everybody in this video will be alive. A good chunk of people in this video from both series have died at some point, so everyone is resurrected here. Rule 3. Like every battle I cover, verses are going to be equalized. This means JJK characters can interact with stands, affect JoJos with domains, etc. This also means the JoJos could see and interact with things related to cursed energy. Otherwise, it would be limiting domains and the JoJos could win with ease. And final rule, the objective is killing the other side. Everybody is bloodlusted here. Also, a few quick side notes, Joseph is going to be his part 2 self because that's his prime. He won't have a stand, and of course Jonathan's not going to have a stand because he never actually used his own stand, even though he does technically have one. Since they didn't have stands in their prime, we're not going to give them that. On a similar note, Giorno won't have Requiem, Yuji won't have Sukuna, and Yuta will be in his original body. And Maki will also be at her peak, because Mai isn't here anyways. The main concern would have been Giorno because obviously it's an insta-win if he has Requiem. But the other 3 things are important to note as well. Everyone is at their strongest. So with those guidelines out of the way, let's cover who would win this fight and how tough it would be. Let's start with speed. Even if you severely highball where JJK's speed could be, they're not really that fast, especially in comparison to the JoJos. Even if you heavily wank some of the characters, only a handful of top tiers are arguably around light speed. For the most part, even at a highball, the other strong characters are hitting massively hypersonic or far lower. And these speeds aren't even hit until the Culling game, very late on actually. This is based on Hikari's fight with Kashimo, as well as the fact that some of these people could do anything against Sukuna in general. So in terms of this battle, that includes Yuji, Yuta, and Maki, as well as Hikari obviously. Every other student is just, well, not really too impressive at all. Even Megumi doesn't really have anything to place him much higher, unless you really want to stretch it and scale him to pre-Shinjuku Yuji, which still really isn't doing much. In a previous video where I placed cars against all of JJK, I did this scaling more in depth and will take the scaling from that video. You could check it out above, but I'm not going to retread the same ground, so it'll be a little less detailed here. That video will have the more in-depth explanations and my thoughts on the Joestars as well. So as for the Joestars, they are really fast, primarily with their stands. But even Jonathan and Joseph without stands scale pretty high. Even Jonathan without a stand was fighting on par with Dio, who's comparable to his part 3 self, who has massively faster than light feats. Anyone with a stand is in this range, and even Jonathan and Joseph are. Even if we look at Sukuna and Kashimo, the fastest in JJK by a good margin, they still get really outsped. Speed is very clearly in the favor of the JoJos. And I think that's part of why a lot of people voted so overwhelmingly for them, as well as some other things we'll cover. But next on to attack power and durability, because this is an area where some of the JJK characters are advantaged. A good chunk of them are weaker, around city block level, maybe even a bit lower, while some of them are town level or higher. Although we don't have much to go off of for Kirara. For the 4 heavy hitters, I like to regard them as around town level if not large town level. As for the JoJos, Jotaro is stated to have the strongest stand physically, and his best feats such as clearing fog place him around small town level. So every other stand is below him and they cap out at that level if they're even close. Physically, Joseph is arguably the strongest without a stand. I covered this more in that video about cars, but in short I consider part 2 Joseph the bar for physical strength, with Jotaro as the bar for stand strength. The other JoJos don't really have any crazy physical feats in terms of their actual bodies, but their stands scale pretty high too. Based on stats within the series, Crazy Diamond and Stone Free are ranked as A in terms of power, so even though they're not on the level of Star Platinum, they should be relatively close. In terms of physical power, Gold Experience is the weakest one here, ranked as a C in terms of power. So as you can see, power-wise, this is actually relatively close. And in my eyes, I feel I'm being relatively conservative on each side for this. Personally, I'd like to highball each of them higher than this, but we're going to go with these assumptions here. So it's more important to look at the actual abilities here. First, we'll look at the JJK students. To begin, Yuji has Cleave and Dismantle obviously, although it's a little weak at this point, but he also has blood manipulation and likely poisoning from it too. Although one area where he really excels is the soul attacks. Yuji can perceive and attack the soul, not just with his regular physical attacks, but also his Cleave and Dismantle. His slashes can attack the soul, which is pretty huge. Not to mention, he has a domain, which we will be getting to later on. Then there's Megumi. He has 10 shadows, with Maharaga obviously being insane, even if he'll attack everybody in the process. But the other shadows are helpful in their own ways too, each having their own unique effects. Then there's Yuta with his copy technique. We'll say here for this video, he'll only be able to copy techniques from those around him. He's copied Shrine before and of course Curse Speech too. Not to mention he has Rika with him for a lot of extra attack power, as well as bringing in weapons and such. We have 2 Curse Speech users here, Yuta and Inumaki. Then there's Hikari with Idle Death Gamble, which will be really helpful here. We'll assume he hits Jackpot because he always hits Jackpot, always bet on Hikari, but that makes him effectively unkillable. As for Nobara, unfortunately she was cut short before we saw her full potential, so speed-wise she's not going to be able to do much here, but if she is able to attack someone, her soul attacks will be really useful against stronger opponents. Even if her striking power isn't really that high compared to some of the other people here, and even if she can't attack them easily, there is one thing she can do. Soul Resonance will be really useful. She just needs a piece of one of the JoJos somehow, and then she'll be able to attack that way, directly harming the soul, and not needing to worry about the speed advantage. Kirara's here too, and even though we don't really have great feats to scale off of, Love Rendezvous would be really helpful as a curse technique here, although it's probably not going to be activated, since Kirara would actually have to make contact with targets before activating the technique. The JoJos are too fast to be affected by this in the first place. As for Maki, there's obviously no curse technique to cover for her. Basically just insane strength and strategy, and a slight amount of regeneration. We'll just give her the split soul katana here. And finally we have Panda. Of course we're using him at his peak too, so he has all of his cores intact. Although it is just Panda after all. Sorry Panda. Drop a like on the video and I'll personally tell Gege to make Panda come back stronger. He'll be the true goat of the series. But that also tells me you like this video and does help out the channel. As for the JoJo side, it's pretty straightforward. Jonathan and Joseph have Hamon, enhancing their physical power, letting them imbue it into objects, and also some level of healing. Jotaro's abilities are obviously raw power and time stopping. Also, Starfinger. Josuke and Giorno are both healers here. Josuke can't heal himself though, but Giorno can heal others. Crazy Diamond lets Josuke restore things, and Giorno has a bunch of other abilities with Gold Experience. Even without Gold Experience Requiem, he is a huge threat. He can imbue things with life, and I think one of the strongest abilities of his here is the fact that he can reflect damage. Like for example, if he creates an animal and that animal takes damage, that damage gets reflected. And of course, Jolene can turn her body into string. Even though stands are tangible and visible in this video, stands have been shown to go through people before, just like they can go through objects. Star Platinum was able to grab Jotaro's heart, and Joseph's too. Plus, other stands like Beach Boy and Diver Down can do things like this, but can this be done to anybody with any sort of stand? If so, the stand users could hypothetically just do that here. With their greater speed, they could just send their stands to stop everyone's heart or something, and that's an instant win. But personally, I don't think that's something that every stand could do because there are other cases where they could have done this. Like, think of the times we've seen it. It doesn't seem like a stand could do this with everybody. Outside of stands that specifically work this way, the only other example we have is Jotaro. The 2 times he did this were on himself and on a dead body. We've never seen this done in a combat situation where, for example, Jotaro is fighting some random person and just grabs their heart. Plus, an example against this is the fact that Josuke had to punch through his mom to get Aqua Necklace, a stand which also gets trapped later on, and can't just phase through what it's trapped in. Stands can go into people and shrink too, even being tangible in those cases, like in the fight against lovers. All those stands had to be shrunk down and they were tangible there. The only instance of this being done on another person was when Star Platinum did this to Joseph, who was dead. In my eyes, there's 2 explanations for this. 1, Star Platinum is one of the few stands that can do this with no restrictions, or 2, some stands such as Star Platinum can do this, but only to inanimate objects or their users. If the former is true, then Jotaro could time stop and just fuck up everyone's organs one by one. If the latter is true, which I think is the case, then this is irrelevant. Still worth covering because that would be an instant win and people would probably bring this up regardless. So I'm going to go with the second assumption here, because that seems more likely in my eyes unless I am forgetting something. Now for the actual fight. The JoJos have impressive hacks on their sides and the speed is heavily mismatched here, especially since the JJK side needs to reinforce themselves and also has to properly react to attacks for proper reinforcement. That leaves the JoJos with a lot of opportunities to win with raw speed alone. Especially with Giorno's damage reflection and Jotaro's time stop, they have multiple ways of achieving this. For the most part, the JoJos are untouchable and have multiple creative ways to kill the other side, even with the strength being relatively equal. However, the abilities on JJK's side will help them a bit, and that's why I think this fight was a lot closer than people gave it credit for. This fight is definitely more in favor of the JoJo's side, but since we already know that, I'm going to focus more on what the JJK side could possibly do, and more specifically why they're a bigger threat than people realize. For one, Hikari is invincible. The JoJos can speed blitz him, but if he's able to pop a jackpot, that'll make things much tougher for them. He'll be virtually unkillable, especially with higher durability to boot. Jotaro and Giorno are the only ones I think would have any chance of killing him while he's invincible, and even then it would be really tough. Jotaro would use time stop and Giorno would use damage reflection or somehow using an animal to help him. However, with the former, even with his strength and time stop, Jotaro might not be able to do any real damage to him. Like if he lands some attacks in time stop, he doesn't have the power to destroy Hikari completely, and given how crazy durable Hikari is like this, Even just destroying his head in time stop would be pretty tough, unless he's not reinforced during that time stop. Call Hikari a punch kick merchant all you want, but he's one of the biggest threats here, if not the biggest threat on the JJK side. Also, Yuta's domain is a huge issue. Speed doesn't matter when you could just get a guaranteed attack. Given the greater attack power on Yuta's side, he could actually take out one of the JoJos just with that. Of course, it depends on what ability he pulls out in his domain, and particularly what he has at his disposal, but this gives Yuta a path to victory too. And remember, we're just using the abilities of the people around him. This would be even crazier if he had other abilities, for example, like Gojo's, or even Kenjaku's. Because in this case, if he had Kenjaku's ability, with him being bloodlusted and doing anything possible to win here, he would have probably swapped with someone in this case, like one of the stronger JoJos, and that would be game over. But even with just the abilities of those around him, this would be huge. Like him copying Nobara's ability in his domain, that would guarantee a hit, and it would be to the soul and do enough damage to actually kill people. And as of the time of recording, Yuji also does have a domain. We have no clue what it does yet, but having a sure hit effect is pretty important. That will definitely be very valuable in this fight, especially with Yuji being one of the strongest people here. Not just in his own verse, but one of the strongest characters in the entire battle, with a domain that gives him a guaranteed hit, making speed pretty much a non-factor. Not to mention, Maharaga is an option too. Using him of course is risky, but he would be an incredibly tough opponent to fight. If he's not quickly destroyed, which would be tough as is, then he could adapt to whoever he's fighting. Could it adapt his stance in general? I feel like that's a stretch. But individual abilities? Definitely. Star Platinum and Gold Experience would be important ones to adapt to. Theoretically, he might even be able to adapt to the greater speed and find some sort of workaround, such as a way to guarantee a hit somehow, for example. He can adapt to any phenomena. Megumi also has the other 10 shadows at his disposal, although only the tamed ones will be useful for him. And this isn't really a major point, but for once, Inumaki could actually be a huge threat here. The JoJos are definitely fast enough to dodge cursed speech, but there are issues too. And this applies to Yuta as well. For one, how would they know it's coming and how to dodge it? After seeing it once, sure, but off the bat they probably won't realize that Inumaki attacks by talking. Afterwards, they could just get out of range when he opens his mouth, but the first time this happens they likely won't realize. Immobilizing them with sleep or don't move off the bat would be huge, especially if Yuta coordinates this with him and they both use it at once. And while it's stressful, Inumaki and Yuta can make people explode with this, or even contort their bodies, although that probably wouldn't affect Jolene much. Yuta actually used this to outright kill before, and Inumaki might have this as well. Plus, he could even use a tape recorder apparently. You can protect yourself from cursed speech, but only if you could use cursed energy on your ears to mitigate it. Plus, you'll have to even recognize this is a threat in the first place. With Yuta, it's probably a bit more obvious with the megaphone he has, but otherwise, this is a consideration too. And of course, soul attacks are another big thing. So weaker characters that can't necessarily harm others, at least in normal circumstances, their soul attacks would really help here. For Yuji, he does have the attack power to actually harm others, but attacking the soul is a huge help too. And if he does cut off a piece of one of the JoJos, for example, like he slices off a finger or something, then Nobara could directly use resonance on that, and that's a really huge advantage. Plus, Maki with a soul split katana would be really helpful. Hitting them would be an issue though. I do think this fight is clearly in the Joestar's favor, but at the same time, I think people really underestimate how easy it is for them. In terms of physical strength, the fight is actually pretty fairly matched. But even the fastest JJK characters can't compete with the slowest JoJos. If this were a regular battle without verse equalization, then the JoJos would have even greater advantages. With stands being invisible, that would make this fight basically impossible, unless Maki's perception is somehow good enough to sense them, but that's just her. But yes, this fight is in the JoJo's favor in my eyes, although definitely a lot closer than people realize. Let me know what you think below. As usual, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on my next video.